The night air was quiet in Jerusalem. It was the time of Passover, and the city was bustling, filled with families and pilgrims celebrating. But away from the crowded streets, in a quiet upper room, Jesus sat with his 12 disciples for what would be their final meal together. He knew what was coming. As they ate, he looked at each of them, the men who had walked dusty roads with him, listened to his teachings, and shared their lives with him for 3 years. His voice was calm, but every word was heavy with meaning. He took a loaf of bread, gave thanks, broke it, and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Then he lifted a cup of wine and said, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." The disciples exchanged confused glances. To them, it was a familiar Passover meal, a tradition they had known their whole lives. But to Jesus, it was a goodbye. It was the institution of a new promise, a new way to connect with God. And then he said something that sent a chill through the room, silencing all conversation. "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." A wave of shock and disbelief washed over them. How could that be possible? They had left everything to follow him. One by one, their voices filled with anxiety. They asked, "Surely you don't mean me, Lord?" But Jesus already knew who it was. The plan was in motion, a plan woven into the fabric of history itself. Later that night, they walked to a familiar place of prayer, the Garden of Gethsemane. The moonlight filtered through the ancient olive trees, casting long shadows on the ground. The sounds of the city faded into a distant hum. Jesus asked his closest friends, Peter, James, and John, to stay awake and pray with him. The weight of what was about to happen was immense, and he sought their support. Then, he walked a little farther into the garden, alone. And there, in the quiet darkness, we see the true, human struggle he faced. The weight of the world was on his shoulders. He fell to the ground and prayed, his voice filled with anguish. "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." This wasn't a moment of weakness, it was a moment of profound strength and surrender. It was the ultimate act of obedience, driven by a love so deep it's hard for us to comprehend. He chose to follow the path set before him, even though he knew the pain it would bring. When he returned to his friends, hoping for comfort, he found them asleep, exhausted from the long day and the emotional weight of the evening. The loneliness of that moment must have been crushing. The Son of God, on the verge of the greatest sacrifice in history, standing completely alone. Suddenly, the peaceful garden was invaded. Torches flickered in the darkness, and the sound of armor and angry voices broke the silence. A group of temple guards and Roman soldiers approached, and leading them was Judas, one of the 12, one of his own. Judas stepped forward, and in a twisted act of intimacy, he greeted Jesus with a kiss. A kiss, a universal symbol of affection and friendship, became the signal for betrayal. Immediately, the soldiers seized Jesus. In the ensuing chaos, the disciples, gripped by fear, scattered and ran away into the night. Jesus was arrested and led away, not resisting, but allowing events to unfold. He was taken before the high priest and the Sanhedrin, the Jewish religious council. They held a hasty illegal trial in the dead of night. False witnesses were brought forward, their stories conflicting and falling apart under scrutiny. The high priest, growing frustrated, finally demanded, "I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." Jesus, who had remained mostly silent, answered calmly and directly, "You have said so." For them, this was blasphemy, the ultimate crime. It was all they needed to condemn him. By morning, as the sun rose over Jerusalem, Jesus was brought before Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. Pilate was a practical, political man, and this religious dispute was an unwelcome problem. He questioned Jesus, trying to understand the charges. "Are you the king of the Jews?" he asked. Jesus replied, "You have said so." Pilate couldn't find any real crime, no grounds for execution under Roman law. He saw a man who was calm, dignified, and certainly not a political threat. But outside, the crowd that had been stirred up by the religious leaders grew louder and more agitated. Their shouts echoed through the courtyard, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" It's a chilling reminder of how quickly public opinion can turn. Just days earlier, many of these same voices had shouted Hosanna, laying palm branches at his feet as he entered Jerusalem. Now they were screaming for his death. Pilate, fearing a riot and wanting to maintain order during the volatile Passover festival, gave in to the pressure. He washed his hands in a symbolic gesture, declaring himself innocent of this man's blood. But he gave the order nonetheless. Jesus was sentenced to be crucified. He was flogged, mocked, and a crown of thorns was pressed onto his head. Then, he was forced to carry his own cross through the winding streets of Jerusalem. His body was weak and broken, but his purpose was unwavering. People lined the streets to watch. Some wept for him, some hurled insults. Many just stood by in silence, watching the horrific procession. On a hill just outside the city walls called Golgotha, the place of the skull, he was nailed to the cross between two criminals. As he hung there, in unimaginable agony, something incredible happened. He looked down at the soldiers who had just gambled for his clothes, at the crowd that had condemned him, and he prayed, not for himself, but for them. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Even in his darkest moment of suffering, his heart was filled with forgiveness and compassion. Hours passed. The sky grew unnaturally dark in the middle of the afternoon, as if creation itself was mourning. He saw his mother, Mary, standing near the cross, her heart breaking. Even then, in his final moments, he thought of her, entrusting her care to his beloved disciple John. Then, with his final reserve of strength, he cried out, "It is finished." This was not a cry of defeat. It was a declaration of victory. The mission he had come to earth to accomplish was complete. Every prophecy was fulfilled. Every requirement of justice was met. The price for humanity's sin had been paid in full. And with that, he breathed his last. At that very moment, the ground shook, and inside the temple, the massive, thick curtain that separated the holiest place from the rest of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom. This was no ordinary event. It was a powerful symbol that the barrier between a holy God and sinful humanity had been destroyed. Access to God was now open to everyone, through Jesus. What looked like the darkest day in human history, the tragic end of a good man, was actually the beginning of a new chapter of hope for the entire world. Because that cross, that moment of death on a lonely hill, was not the end of the story. It was the turning point for all eternity, and the world would never be the same. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing for more content that explores these profound moments in history.